and welcome to the Beyond the Technology podcast. I'm Kelly Moat, Programme Lead for Accessibility at JISC. In this episode, we'll be discussing the potential of AI and other emergent technology to enhance accessibility for students in ways that are both safe and meaningful. I am delighted to be joined by my colleague, Helen Nicholson-Benn, who is a JISC specialist in both assistive technology and AI. Also, we'll be joined by Professor Anne-Christine Glenster from the University of Cambridge and the Glen Lead Centre, and Nelly Iacobescu from the University of Edinburgh. Welcome to you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. I'll get us started, shall I? I'll say in my role at JISC, I work across both our AI and accessibility teams. So I'm very excited to be having this conversation today. My focus for the past few years has been that intersection of AI with accessibility and with assistive technology. And I do engage a lot with our different community groups. I'm facilitating a lot of meetups and events where we share best practices and explore these evolving ways that AI is supporting inclusion, but also exploring where we can mitigate some of those emerging risks as well. So it's very exciting to have Nelly here as a practitioner to talk about her own experiences and observations on AI. Nelly, would you like to start us off a bit by introducing yourself and telling us a bit about what you do?
Yes, thank you. I am media and AI service manager in the media team at Information Services. And I look after our captioning service. So we record lectures. We record all of our lectures actually, and we have another media platform which allows people to upload their own videos, and they all get transcription, automatic transcription. And where this isn't good enough, I have a wonderful team of student interns who do caption correction. And so kind of manage that workload, and I also look after an AI research project, which we've been running for the past year and a half almost now, in which we look at ways to improve the automatic transcription with the use of AI, so that we can widen the scope of my captioners team, and provide better quality transcript captions everywhere in the university.
Brilliant, thank you. There's so much already to get into there. Of course, you've mentioned AI captioning and transcription, a really prominent area, of course, where AI has long really improved accessibility through the ability to automate captioning and transcription. Could you give us a bit more detail on how that project worked, where you're using AI to actually improve captions?
Of course, I love talking about this. So we currently use two separate services that provide us automatic speech recognition, ASR. And this happens on upload. So whether it's a lecture recording or whether it's a different video that someone's uploaded, they automatically get transcribed. It's part of the service that we negotiated with our suppliers. However, these ASR systems don't excel at every subject, at every type of jargon, or indeed at every kind of accent. So we were looking at how we can improve that text transcript using AI. So we're trying to be as cost effective as we can and not reanalyze the entire media clip, the entire video or audio file. And we are just looking at the text files. Now, with the leaps in AI over the past couple of years, and with the massive knowledge base of large language models, we've seen that they have so much context that they can figure out what the subject is of a lecture or of a chunk of a lecture of a a few lines of the transcript, let's say. And they can identify where a word might be transcribed incorrectly, and they can then replace that incorrect word or phrase with what it would assume to be the correct transcription. And most of the time, it's right in doing that. So it really provides an extra layer of correction before the human captioners get to it. And instead of the human captioners looking at the lecture slides or Googling all sorts of odd scientific terms, they have a head start already and they can just verify that this is what is shown on the lecture slides, or they can verify that this is the name that was mentioned, and so on.
I mean, it's such a fantastic project, and I mean, it sounds like what you're saying there is that that extra layer of AI. It's not replacing your student captioners at all. It's just enhancing what they can do. I would guess then that maybe that's helping to improve the turnaround time for things like captions, which can be so important.
That is the plan to improve the turnaround time. Currently, we promise about 4 days. Obviously, this varies a lot, but it depends on how long the lecture is, on how good the audio quality is, what the subject is, all sorts of variables there. So we're looking to improve the turnaround time from 4 days to maybe less, half that time, and we're also looking to be able to correct a higher volume of media, because we can only do so much, and there's absolutely no way that my team of about 15 can keep up with the huge amounts of media that we produce, every week, every semester.
Of course. Excellent. And of course, obviously, in this project, you've got a lot of student involvement already. How are sort of perceptions of AI among students at Edinburgh generally? Has this been quite well received?
Oh, I wish students would speak to me and tell me. Um, we are trying to get feedback from them. I think our captioners, our student interns, are quite biased. They love it. So I'm trying to keep my ears and eyes open and hear feedback from other areas as well. I think they are very astute in observing what does and doesn't work in the caption correction systems we have, in the ASR that we have. And I know some of them do use AI in their day to day. They have used AI to suggest improvements to our service, which I find wonderful. So they're quite involved and they just kind of use it as a tool that they're now used to. So I don't think it's perhaps that much of a novelty or a scary thing to them. I think it's just something that exists and they have access to. I do need to mention that Edinburgh University, we have ELM, ELM. It stands for Edinburgh Access to Large Language Models, or to Language Models, I think. So it's essentially a platform which all staff and students have access to, that offer various models for free, including the latest GPTs or open source models. So students actually have access to that for free. They don't need to pay for a subscription out of their own pocket. And it also has a zero data retention agreement with OpenAI, so they know that whatever they put in there is as safe as it can be.
I'm glad you've brought Element to the conversation already, as I was going to ask. If not, I'm really interested, yeah, because I think you've mentioned to me before that there's been some student creation with Elm as well. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yes, there has been a lot of student and staff creation with Elm. There are so many really useful projects appearing everywhere. But one that I was recently reading up on, so it's fresh in my mind, is a project called LectureMate, I believe, if I have that correct. from two of our students from the School of Informatics. So what they're doing is they are taking the lecture transcripts and running them through Elm, and also I think they combine that with LaTeX, which is a system that transcribes maths equations. It's applicable to STEM subjects, which I didn't study, so I know very little about. Um, and they create lecture notes, very nice looking PDFs, lecture summaries, and they also create quizzes and flashcards that they can use as a study aid. And they are sharing this with their colleagues. And, it also forces them to speak to their tutors and their course organizers to get permission from them to do this. And they're doing this through Elm, which I think is wonderful as a kind of a grassroots movement towards some features that our team is already looking at, but we're much more slow, process oriented, negotiating with a bunch of stakeholders. So it's taking us a while. And it's wonderful for us to see that students are already creating this themselves. So it is something they want, and it gives us confirmation almost that we are working towards the right direction. We're heading in the right direction with this.
Brilliant. I think it's so encouraging that students are taking up that opportunity, and that I suppose in your example it's just that initial access to something like Elm that can go so many different ways and kind of empower students as well to be able to make something that they want.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
And that helps with their studies. At the end of the day, they're not trying to
Yeah.
take shortcuts, which is something that is a concern for many people. They are genuinely trying to improve the way in which they learn.
That's true. And I think sometimes maybe we do get stuck in some of those narratives around what we assume that students and learners want from AI, and that it might be things like shortcuts, when in fact, when given these opportunities and access, it's more often about improving their own experience of learning, which is what they're there to do. So that's
Absolutely.
a brilliant example. You mentioned a little bit there, I think, about how maybe the things are communicated as well to staff and students around AI. I know, of course, that there's still a range of different concerns that come up around AI, around things like sustainability as well. How has that process been really? Is there anything that's worked well, do you think, at Edinburgh that might even help other institutions?
I think we are approaching it with enthusiasm, but with with a healthy dose of skepticism, let's say, or maybe not skepticism isn't the right word, but caution. I think caution is the correct word. We do have other interns as well as permanent staff who are looking at the sustainability aspects of it. And we're trying to figure out, is it damaging to the environment, but also to our digital infrastructure, or is it genuinely something useful? To give you an example from my work, we're testing things now, but it appears that by using Elm, we would kind of reduce the costs of correcting one transcript to about half. So hopefully, we can do, double the amount in that case. Um, in terms of the environmental impact, I think we're also approaching it with caution. So this is why we're only feeding it the text transcripts and we're not duplicating the work of the ASR, which is already having its own environmental impact. So we're being really cautious to use these tools in a sustainable way. There are other things we're doing, for example, on our media platforms, trying to make everything a bit smaller, not have it be over intensive in terms of bandwidth and data consumption and all of that. And some of the analytics tools we use for this are kind of based on AI, so it helps with that.
But yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's AI there has been, I suppose, considered in the context of all your digital infrastructure. And it's really interesting, actually, that particularly that point you made around not duplicating processing with AI, and as well comparing the benefits to the costs. We might not always consider what time or what resource we've saved by using AI for a use like that. So that is always really interesting food for thought.
Yes, we are trying to use it, to scale it up. So then these are things that we have to consider. And I think you might have asked about communicating it to staff and um, kind of getting buy-in, perhaps, from everyone. And I think just like sustainability is something we need to think about at every step or at every technology we adopt. We also think about accessibility. So this is something that's kind of ingrained in our processes now. And every new technology or digital tool goes through quite a rigorous process of approval from everything from ethics board, data protection impact assessment, equality impact assessment, tech committees, teaching committees. So this lengthy process has built up a trust in the institution that we're not implementing something for the sake of it. It is genuinely to try and improve the experience of our students and our staff.
That's excellent. I think, I mean, it sounds like the reception from your students, those that I've shared with you at least, has been very good. And you've obviously taken that time to build up a meaningful approach. It's, I think, a really good bit of advice, really, for anyone wary as well of getting started with AI projects. That there is a lot of good practice out there. There's a lot to learn from others, and you sharing this is incredibly helpful. Shall we have a little think about maybe the future as well? Is there anything you'd like to achieve next?
Well, speaking kind of selfishly in terms of my own project, we would like to launch our transcript correction tool and perhaps even in the future integrate it with our other systems so that we can have accurate lecture summaries created or descriptions of the videos included in the courses, and perhaps quizzes and materials to help revision that are based on the lecture transcripts or any other media. We can allow our captioners the time to correct many more transcripts from much wider subject areas, and that might allow us to analyze more data and see where improvements or human correction are most needed, I think. In a broader sense, I think I'm somewhat optimistic about the future, and about the fact that AI can be used for good, and it won't just impact people's lives and jobs negatively. I think it can be used to do wonderful things if we create the right environment for it. And I think it can help us speed up some tedious processes, and it can help us feel empowered to use it to create, whether it's creating digital tools for ourselves or whether it's creating anything else, really. It could be even art or lectures or, possibilities are endless. But it does make me hopeful, even though I know some quite terrible uses for it as well. That these wouldn't be alone. It can be used to improve learning, to improve experience, to improve accessibility, to kind of democratize access to everyone who might not know that they need a bit of help. they can just go to Elm and and type up what they need.
I think I mean I love to hear some hope as well. As you say, a lot of the AI related news is not as positive. And I truly do think, I mean, from my experience speaking to our community members and focusing on the area of accessibility, that I'd say AI's most important function is enhancing accessibility. And it's an area that we should put, a lot of the work into. So again, it's brilliant to hear from people who really are. So we were speaking before about student innovation with AI, which is such a great area where students can build their own tools and maybe feel empowered to influence the way AI is being used in education as well. We know, though, there's a lot of barriers to students getting involved, to maybe feeling like they can be part of AI conversations. Do you have any tips for encouraging students, or what do you think we need to do to get more student involvement in these conversations?
I think if we make these tools available to our students and we send the message that it's okay, or more than okay, they're encouraged to use them, they will see them as something natural or normal to use, and they can allow themselves to be creative. Perhaps they won't feel that guilt that they're using something that they shouldn't. Thinking back on my own time in school when Wikipedia was kind of frowned upon, where actually it's a really good starting point. So I think sending the message that it is okay and encourage them to use AI tools will unlock their creativity to find out what they need, what they can improve from their own experience or in their own learning with these tools. Um, I had met someone who was returning to education because they didn't realize they had dyslexia while they were in school. And they only realized it after captions on videos had become ubiquitous and they realized how much more of the content they were understanding. They thought academia wasn't for them, they're just not good at school. And now, because this was available broadly, they were coming back to education in their 30s, and finding, passions for subjects they never dreamed on about. So it really can bring learning to a lot more people. It widens access as well if they have these tools and they don't need to pay for a subscription or they don't need to worry that they're doing something they shouldn't be doing.
And yeah, that is such an interesting story, and I think one that will resonate with others as well. As you say, there's such a benefit perhaps to making these tools widely accessible in a way that those without formal support plans or international students as well, who may not be accessing the same support as home students do, giving them something that is just widely available can be so important and really change a person's experience of education as well.
Absolutely. And instead of expecting someone to put their hand up and say, I need something more from you, or expecting them to go through perhaps a formal process or getting a formal diagnosis or, getting a schedule of adjustments formally, we can just level the playing field and provide these things which are easy to provide, such as transcripts, which are accurate on every learning material,
Mm.
and then this already opens up, the conversation for a lot more people who would have otherwise been struggling and maybe not realizing why they were struggling.
Thank you for that. And I think that's actually a brilliant note to conclude on. It's been so lovely to hear your real experiences of AI and the amazing things you've done. And we're very excited maybe to have you back again in the future when we've got a bit further on those projects. So I'll say thank you to Nelly. And Kelly, I'm going to hand back over to you for our next
Yeah,
guest.
thanks, Helen, and thanks, Nellie, as well for those kind of practical insights of how educators are using AI in really innovative and inclusive ways, but also really balanced as well to do it safely and responsibly. And as you said, with a kind of cautious eye as well on the impact and potential impact of the technology you're using. For this next part of the podcast, we're going to kind of open things up a bit and look at more broadly the potential for harnessing the power of AI or other emergent technologies for access and equity at the kind of sector and societal level. Um, our next guest, Professor Anne-Christine Glenster, and I have worked together lots over the last 2 to 3 years on a project called Accessible Digital Futures. And in January, we launched a project report, and that followed a series of national workshops involving 143 participants in total, with contributions from 49 universities, plus policymakers, accessibility specialists, researchers, and industry partners. So, really full on, in depth project, which was huge fun. And Christine, please could you just kick us off by introducing yourself and telling us a bit about what it is that you do and the capacity in which we work together.
Well, thank you, Kelly, for having me. It's an absolute pleasure, as always. I think you've already started to introduce me quite well. But my name is Anne-Christine Glenster. I'm a professor at the University of Cambridge. I'm also the executive director of the Glenn Leeds Centre, which is an independent consortium of researchers. And in that capacity, I have co-chaired Accessible Digital Futures with Kelly for nearly 3 years. And I think that when we started, Kelly, we knew that there was a need for the sector to be AI ready and for the sector to understand the different dimensions of that, the impact on students, the impact on staff, but also what it meant, I think, for the sector overall. I did not expect the amount of interest we've had, the contributions we've had, the depth of knowledge that people have in the sector that they've been willing to share with us. And I think that has been rather overwhelming to see that there is such, I would say, almost tech positive. I think we can say that, right? People really want to use good tools. They want to make work better for staff, and they want their students to learn. But then the question is, how do we do that is accessible and equitable? And I think we're still grappling with that. We have some findings, but we have certainly uncovered some of those key and thorny issues that people struggle with.
Yeah, I mean, in the recommendations, which we'll link to the podcast resources, there was a lot of recommendations, lots covering all sorts of different aspects of the way that technology is used, but also encouraging lots of collaboration between the sector members themselves and also policymakers, industry, government. So lots of passion for coming together and finding solutions. Now, I suppose the biggest challenge now is there's so many recommendations. What do we do? We can't do all of them simultaneously. So prioritization seems to be key here. So what have been people in the sector that we've been sharing the research with, what are they saying are their highest priority areas to address first?
Well, we know there were certain things that kept cropping up again and again. And at the same time, of course, there were a few things that I think are absolutely key that perhaps we weren't as aware of. So to start about, what did people constantly tell us? They wanted to find ways of dealing with procurement. And this is exactly, this is the one that everybody talks about. What I didn't expect was that the few tech companies, or not few, but the tech companies we had also wanted to tackle this and upstream the information they had to the design phase. They kept coming and saying, okay, we don't even know what good accessibility looks like here. Help us figure that out. I didn't expect that. So I think that the sector, there's a huge appetite for doing more practical work on procurement. That's one. The second thing that people talked about a lot, and I don't think we have a good answer for yet, is how to make sure that AI works for students and more broadly people. And so we saw that there was a lot of thinking about efficiency and making sure that the use of technology was transparent and also accountable, but not necessarily reflecting how students do use these technologies. And that leads us to one of the big challenges when it comes to accessibility, which is the digital divide. And I think that is, over the time you and I worked on this, Kelly, that has come more to the forefront than I expected. Because we see so-called strong students. Now, I've never understood what that means, but that is something that often we refer to. Strong students will use AI to enhance their learning, while so-called weak students will use it to pass exams. And we then see that being also reproduced with students who have accessibility needs. Kelly, should you and I also note that when we came to this, we decided that accessibility is a broad idea.
Mhm.
And I think that has widened during these 3 years as well. That more perspectives, and the more we use these technologies, we find new challenges and different kinds of people having different kinds of challenges with these technologies. And how do we as a sector identify and adapt to that is one of the crucial questions. So those are two of the priorities. I know you have a few more.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, but just to pick up on your points there, I think it connects so neatly back to some of the use cases that Nelly was telling us about, and so the potential for the technology to make these access solutions available to everybody, anyone who might need it, regardless of the reasons for that, and making sure the students all have tools just as part of their experience at university as well.
Yeah, I was going to say absolutely. And that led us, we spent quite a lot of time talking about universal design versus personalization. And there are different schools of thought here. But I think that one of the fear we also uncovered, which is one of the things that as a sector we need to think about, is there is a danger we're taking a step backwards. So we've talking about suddenly doing exams on paper because people are scared of students cheating and so on. And we also know then that some of the accessibility gains we have had for fantastic people who've done great things in the field might now suddenly be at risk. So I think it's not just about how do we adapt to new technologies in terms of the teaching and the assessment, but also making sure that if we adjust across the board to these things, we need to make sure that the solutions we adapt are accessible.
Mhm. Yeah. Yep, and further to that as well, and again drawing on some of Nelly's wonderful examples, the potential for students themselves to innovate
Mm.
and to find solutions as well is something that came through our findings in the Accessible Digital Futures project as well, was the need to center students in the development of products and to get them involved earlier on, but also to them as innovators, not just as people we consult with, but to actually actively involve them and harness their own ideas. Because all sorts of interesting things are coming out there, and that's something, in terms of going forward, it's something I know that just we're very keen to explore further and to look at the best ways to support students to do that as well. Because sometimes I think something that came out quite strongly in our research was there was a real desire to centre students and to work with them, but sometimes people weren't sure what was the right way to do that, to ensure that students are adequately, rewarded for their time and that it's a mutually beneficial experience for them. So we're really interested to take that forward. Also, in terms of the recommendations as well, you said like the power of the collective came out a lot, like you're saying with procurement, collective purchasing was seen as a way to kind of leverage sector power. And I know colleagues across JISC have been, writing quite a lot about that recently, and the benefits to working collectively and sharing information and also influencing industry and policymakers around what it is that we need. Because as you're mentioning, and Christine, sometimes they don't actually know. We've got to keep that conversation going two ways. I think people loved as well and want us to continue providing spaces for people to have these conversations with industry, policymakers, government, and with each other as well. There's so much value that can come out of that, those in-person chats. But thinking about these priorities, now we've got them, what do we need to do to influence meaningful change? Um, I know that you've always got lots of great ideas about how to affect meaningful change and how to bring people together with your great kind of convening powers. What ideas do you have about taking things forward and enacting these priorities?
Okay, so I have 3 concrete things
Mhm.
next, right? If we are lucky enough. Number 1, uh, everybody said, "We want more of this." I think that was the conclusion. People wanted to hear each other talk and discuss and have the I think the feedback we kept getting again and again, Kelly, was that people like to think collectively, not just come into a workshop space and say, "This is my position," or "This is my organization's position." And then vent for that people are actually able to work through problems in a constructive way together. So that's number 1. People want to share and build community. And I think that JISC has a key role to play there. And I think that one of the reasons why we were so successful so far was because of that fantastic job JISC has done in bringing people together and letting the right people come into what I would call a safe space. So I think it's really important, for example, that we haven't recorded people. We've done Chatham House rules. We have allowed for that development of the conversation, and yeah, and not shied away from things that have been difficult. I don't think so. I think more of that, and I leave that with JISC at the moment because I think that the JISC is fantastic in that sense. One of the things that really struck me was there is a need for sophisticated policy advice. And by that, I mean not just advocacy of a particular ideological position. There was very little of that, I would say, in our workshops. But there were real concern about how do we get this into policy? How do we get it on the institutional level in policies, but also on the national stage or the sector level stage? And we don't have good mechanisms for that. So concretely out of that, Sarah Laithwaite down in Southampton University, and I want to take that evidence gathering for policy further as a spin out from this project. And we are setting up a virtual observatory to do so. So watch the space. Kelly, I'm sure you're going to help us publicize and make sure that the information is both accessible and robust. And the idea is to create some sort of evidence base and also information gathering that we can use, particularly to make sure that we inform our decision makers. That's always the question. We don't want just opinions. We want actually good information to end up in the right hands at the right time. So that is the concrete things we're doing. And I ask anyone who's interested in that work to get in touch with me or Sarah or both or Kelly, shout out. And the third thing I want to say that you and I haven't really discussed yet, Kelly, but thinking about, coming on today, is I run a project at the University of Cambridge called Logos. And it has a subtitle called Securing Our Epistemic Future. And I'm incredibly concerned about how we're able as human beings to gain and make and process information and knowledge. And the fact that we don't just get a infosphere that is made for machines. And so accessibility is a huge bit of this. As part of that project, we're having a work stream on education and research. And so what I sit in a lot of policy discussions with sector leaders. I sit in a lot of discussions with researchers, particularly a unit at Cambridge called Digital Education Futures Initiative. We see that on the research front, there is so much work being done on new pedagogies and the co-creation you talked about with students and the co-intelligence. And we're talking about what do we actually want education to be about? And that, on the one hand, is a huge question. And I think we need to line up that research community with the sector, with the accessibility community, and with policymakers. If we don't, what I see is emerging and that worries me, is we are building very sophisticated AI and tech models for assessment based on old criteria or biological criteria. So I've sat in presentations by big tech companies that shouldn't be named, but we can all imagine who they are, who talk about how wonderful their AI tutor system is or whatever it is. And I'm thinking, but this isn't what we need to learn or the skills we want to impart with our students for tomorrow. So how do we get that tech sector into the new pedagogy world and bridge that gap? And that, I think, the University of Cambridge, we can do some work on that.
Well, as always, lots of really exciting and thought-provoking, but lots of action as well. I think inherent in your plans. I think it's great to see, because I think we're all so familiar with reports and recommendations come out all the time if you work in this sector, but to see those turn into real, tangible, further pieces of work that informs policy, that informs education and industry. I think that's something that is fantastic to see. So we will absolutely watch that space and share information about all of this with our communities. And I know there's going to be lots of excitement around all of that. Um, so thinking about all of this, all of what you've just been talking about, there's lots of potential for positives, but as you've rightly, raised there, there's real concerns as well, about human rights and technology. 10 things on a positive note. What makes you hopeful for the future?
Oh, one thing stood out to me over the course of the project that we've done, Kelly, and it's the people. And what makes me have great hope for the future is my fellow human beings. And I all of us, right? And I'm thinking there are so many fantastic people doing fantastic work, including our fantastic students, that I am a great optimist because we can harness these technologies for the good of all of us. Um, if we decide to do so. So I am absolutely optimistic, and I'm thinking about just working with you, Kelly. That gives me, faith in the future. So simple as that. People make me hopeful.
Fantastic. Oh, what a wonderful, wonderful note to end on. Thank you so much, Anne-Christine and Nellie, for sharing your incredible insights and experiences here today. I'm sure lots of people will be really interested to investigate more about what you've been talking about. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll include lots of links to your other work, to your projects. Nellie, you did a community drop-in for us a little while ago, which demonstrated in more detail how you do your captioning process. So we'll include a link to that as well. But I would just like to, on behalf of Helen and myself, thank you both for coming along today and giving your time. And I would like to ask our listeners to check the show notes for a link also to subscribe to Headlines, which is JISC's newsletter that has all the latest EdTech news, guidance and events that are tailored to you. Thank you and goodbye.